Well, hello. This is another daily update from the California Board of Psychology. I'm pretty tired right now as I'm talking to you. May look kind of tired. It's Friday, and I just spent the morning in a chat with Claude, where I went through pretty much everything from my entry into the family courts in the 2010 period, what was happening with that, what my analysis was, looking at the forensic custody evaluators, looking at the PAS experts, and then 2010, I developed my treatment plan and implemented it and walked Claude through all the things I've done since 2010 till 25 and into 26. What's going to happen here? So I have a Claude chat that pretty much knows everything that's going on, but it's tiring, okay, to go through that amount of information over the course of a morning. So I'm likely to take a little nap here and recover. But that it has to do with what my defense is going to be basically, and helping me organize the points that I need to do that in an efficient way. And I have Saturday and Sunday to get that all together. My cross-examination, I did some discussions with AI yesterday about that, typically Claude, about the cross-examinations, and I'm pretty good about where I'm going to go. I still need to go through their evidence per se and work out more specifically, but I think I'm pretty up to speed on the cross-examination. My cross-examination of Lorandos and Burnett are likely to be very interesting, each in its own way. With the Burnett cross-examination of particular interest, since I've had several email exchanges with him that will be introduced into evidence. I'll be interested to see what he says, as well as I get to look at both of their vitas for competence and have them describe where they possess the competence. Or are they experts who are not by self-proclamation and aren't even competent with the pathology? We'll find out. I get to ask some questions. Now, today, though, what I want to talk about is the estimate of how many children have been psychologically abused in the family courts over the 40-year period, but also more specifically from the period of 2013 to 2025, because 2013 is when the DSM-5 was released, and that's when these emails from Dr. Burnett indicate that he knows what the DSM-5 diagnosis is, and he knows that parental alienation isn't in it, but he just turns every rejection into acceptance. He says, well, it's not in there, by words, but it's in there in spirit. No, they rejected it entirely. It's not in there in spirit. It's actually what he's calling spirit is actual psychiatric disorders, delusional disorder, factitious disorder, and child psychological abuse from either one, both of those. That's not parental alienation in spirit. That's other major psychiatric disorders, and so it's just kind of interesting. We'll find out what he thinks about this stuff going forward. But I've been talking with AI, just estimating the prevalence of child abuse in the family courts, and you can do this. I'll explain how you can estimate how many cases of child abuse there are. And one of the fundamental issues is that making up pathology labels for child abuse hides the child abuse from view and treatment. So it's not overly affectionate syndrome, it's child sexual abuse. And it's not stern discipline dynamic, it's child physical abuse. And it's not parental alienation, it's child psychological abuse. And this is really, really important to understand. And because I've worked child abuse, I've worked up close and personal, clinical director. I'm not just working as one of the treatment providers, I'm in charge of the whole kind of operation. So I kind of know about child abuse and complex trauma and foster care and stuff. And one of the important principles is do not use euphemisms. If it's child abuse, say child abuse. Okay. And that's really, really, really important. So when it's child abuse, say child abuse so that everyone's clear on what we're talking about. Okay. It's not parental alienation, it's child psychological abuse. It's not overly affectionate syndrome. It's child sexual abuse. And we need to be clear on that and to use the terminology. Now, Dr. Burnett has known what the DSM-5 diagnosis is since 2013 because he sent around emails to the parental alienation study group, but he just doesn't tell people because he wants to be an expert in something. In the moment it's in the DSM-5 as delusional thought disorders and factitious disorder, then he's not really an expert in those sorts of things. And he's not an expert in attachment pathology, and he's not an expert in family systems and stuff. So, and he wants to be an expert. So he makes up a new pathology label and doesn't tell people what the actual DSM diagnosis is. And as a result, no one knows it's a delusional disorder. And as a result, no one knows it's psychological child abuse. And so as a result, 750,000 children have been sacrificed to child abuse since 2013 to 2025 in the US, and that's 1.5 million children worldwide because of parental alienation. If we'd stopped calling it in 2013, DSM comes out and says, there's no such thing as parental alienation. Dr. Burnett sends around an email that says, well, that's okay because it's a delusional disorder and factitious disorder. Well, if he had been promoting the DSM-5 delusional and factitious disorder, we'd be getting the child psychological abuse diagnosis since 2013. As those are major psychiatric disorders in the parent. It's like schizophrenia, only it's a delusional disorder. It's not the widespread thing. And it's a trauma delusion, not a psychotic delusion. But it's still a psychotic state in a parent who's creating that in the child. That's child psychological abuse. So we would have had the child psychological abuse diagnosis since 2013. So how many children have not been diagnosed with child abuse since 2013? AI is estimated about 750,000 children in the United States and 1.5 million worldwide. And the way it estimates that, and I'll talk about that in a second, is basically you take the number of divorces, then you take the number of divorces with children in them. That's either 40 to 50%, depending upon which statistics you use. Then you take 10% of those, because that 10% are the high conflict ones. The other 90% handle things really well, but 10% of them just become high conflict. And guess what? Estimates are that about 6% of the population has borderline personality disorder, and about 6% have narcissistic personality disorder. So that's about 10 to 12% have either narcissistic or borderline personality pathology, which is known to be high conflict. And oh my goodness, about 10% of divorces wind up in high conflict. I wonder if there's a connection. So now here's the ethical concern that's going on. It has to do with standard 5.04 media presentations. When psychologists provide public advice and comment via print, internet, or other electronic transmission, they take precautions to ensure that the statements One, are based on their professional knowledge, training, or experience in accord with appropriate psychological literature. So let me talk about that. So that would be based in appropriate competence in attachment, in child abuse and complex trauma, in personality disorders, um, and in the family systems pathology, in the established knowledge consistent with 2.04, and two, are otherwise consistent with this ethics code, that would be 2.04, and do not indicate that a professional relationship has been established with the recipient. Now, notice this 5.04 cites specifically to 2.04, see standard 2.04 bases for scientific and professional judgments. Now, why do you think standard 5.04 on media presentations would cite specifically to 2.04? What would be the harm if psychologists start doing media presentations that are not based on the established scientific and professional knowledge of the discipline, like attachment, like the DSM-5, like personality disorders, like family systems? What would be the harm if they just started making stuff up that wasn't based in real knowledge and then started spreading it over the internet? I'll let you kind of figure out why standard 5.04 would cite to 2.04. Now, the basis for scientific professional knowledge, what it cites to here, this is what it says. Psychologists' work is based upon established scientific and professional knowledge of the discipline. And just right off the top, the DSM-5 is the established scientific and professional knowledge of the discipline. Okay, there's no argument with that. The DSM-5 is scientifically established information. That's American Psychiatric Association. So is the attachment literature. So is family systems. So is child abuse and complex trauma. But the DSM-5 is just clear. So use that. Please, everybody, use the DSM-5 as a basis for your diagnostic statements. Now, here's what I've done. So how many children were sacrificed to child abuse since 2013? The answer, 750,000 in the US, 1.5 million worldwide. Now, where does that come from? So that comes from Claude. And it's up on my blog right now. So you can go to my blog, and this is a Claude analysis. The Claude's misdiagnosis of child abuse, 2013 to 2025, with that was Dr. Burnett's email there. And it's a prompt response log. So basically, I'm just asking Claude to provide the estimates and then asking Claude to provide the analysis. And you can take this, you can upload it to your own AI and talk about it, or you can get your own AI to do the same thing. And the 2013 email is up on my website, so you can grab that and give it to your AI and say, what does this mean that Dr. Burnett knows it's not in the DSM-5 and that other diagnoses are? Then the other one that's up there is with ChatGPT-5. So how many children do we have who are being abused every year in the family courts? And so that's a ChatGPT 5 it's 5.2 actually, misdiagnosis of child abuse since 2013. So again, it's the prompt response log with the ChatGPT 5.2, and you can go and look at it, upload it, talk about your own AI. It's really easy. Okay, we got AI. How many divorces are there? Take, how many divorces with children? How many are 10% of that are high conflict? And then if you estimate 2 children per family, so what you'll get is about 250,000 to 300,000 since that period, 2013 to 2025. Now, if you add 2 children, that's going to be 600 to 750,000. And the slight variation is how many divorces have children. I think ChatGPT estimated it was 0.4, so 40%. And Claude estimates it's 50%. So you get 600 to 750,000. Now, that's also a low estimate when they both say, well, corrected for stuff, it could be up to 950,000. But I said, let's be conservative. Let's use the lower number of 750,000. Now, lower number of child abuse. Now, the basic unit here, just so you're aware, is that with one child, just one child, looking at everything, it's about 25,000 a year. So 25,000 child abuse cases enter the family court every year in the United States. And then a comparable number when you consider Canada, Europe, Australia, and the rest of the world. So that's about 25,000 a year in both. So that's 50,000 a year total globally. And then you can add a second child as typically add typical families. So that's two children. Now it's up to 25 to 50,000, 100,000 globally. And then if you add the parents as a third traumatized person, you're going to get add another 25,000 to that. So it'll be with two children, it's going to be 50,000. With add the parent, it's going to be 75,000 children children and parents per year are being exposed to the abuse, child abuse and spousal abuse. And that's 75,000 in the United States, 75 per thousand in the rest of the world. So 150,000 children a year. So now if you want to go back 40 years to 1985, when parental alienation was first proposed, by the way, that was during the period of the DSM-3. And the DSM-3 had a shared psychotic disorder, shared delusional disorder, and factitious disorder imposed on another. So it had the two major psychiatric disorders in it. All the time that Gardner and the PAS experts have been proclaiming, it's a new pathology called parental alienation. No, it's not. It's in the DSM-3. You just didn't look. Shared delusion, shared psychotic, and factitious disorder. Then, in, I think it was 2004 or something, the DSM-4 comes out. So the DSM-3 transfers, and so that's 25 or about 20 years. In 1985, 95, 2005, somewhere around that, that they've been tossing around this parental alienation idea. Was it included in the DSM-4? Nope. It's never been included. So they just moved on, but the shared psychotic disorder is still there. Shared delusional disorder and the factitious disorder is still there. So there's still major psychiatric disorders in the parent. It's just not getting diagnosed. And interestingly about this is that all the time of this parental alienation thing back in the 80s and 90s and 2000s, when Gardner and his acolytes are proposing this, the criticism is that it was junk science because it's not in the DSM, which is true, but the actual diagnoses are in the DSM. All they had to do is say, well, it actually is in the DSM. It's a shared delusional disorder and factitious attachment pathology imposed on the child. And everybody would have gone, oh, it is in the DSM. But they're all fighting like it's not in the DSM. It is. Just look, it is. And then we have DSM-4 all the way up until 2013 when the DSM-5 comes out. When the DSM-5 comes out, Dr. Burnett and his whole collective had a full opportunity. I was part of their PASG group starting about 2011. So I watched them in 2012 and they're advocating and they had a full opportunity to give the American Psychiatric Association everything and all their arguments and all their evidence about parental alienation. Okay. And at first they were hoping maybe it would be a diagnosis. The APA said, not a chance. And they said, okay. Well, maybe they'll mention it somewhere. And that was the hope. Not that it's actually a diagnostic thing, just that it would get mentioned somewhere. And I'm watching this. And you can see it in the emails. I'm watching this. And then the DSM-5 comes back, zero mention. Now, interestingly, another thing that the emails from Burnett point out is that the DSM-5 did add several diagnoses. V codes, they're called. So they're not major psychiatric disorders or modifiers. One was child affected by parental distress. Well, that's like spot on the V code for the family courts. We have a child affected by the parental stuff. And in that V code, that would be the perfect place to mention parental alienation. And so child affected and parental, but they didn't. The American Psychiatric Association pointedly did not mention parental alienation in a V code that they created that would provide this special context. I think that's a pretty clear message from them. They know what parental alienation is, and it's not anything they're going to even get close to, even by mention. And they also added another V code of child psychological abuse. So whereas in the 4 and 3, creating a psychotic disorder in the child is child psychological abuse. Creating a factitious disorder in the child, Munchausen by proxy, is child psychological abuse. And that's kind of recognized, and everybody kind of knew that. But there wasn't a specific category in either one of those. We had physical, sexual, and neglect abuse, and they were kind of spread around. In 2013, the American Psychiatric Association pulled all those child abuse diagnoses into a category, child maltreatment. And it's in the back. They're called V codes. They're modifying codes. They're not being abused by it as a child is not a psychiatric disorder like schizophrenia or ADHD. That's something that affects all the other stuff. And so that's what V codes are. So you lose a job, there's a V code for that. If you have medical problems, there's a V code for medical problems. And so they're modifying. So in 2013, they added the V code V995.51, child psychological abuse. But they took out the shared psychotic disorder. So if we had been fighting to keep the shared psychotic disorder and adjust it to the family courts, we could have that as a major psychiatric disorder specifically for the family courts. But we didn't spend time doing that, okay? Because I arrived in 2010, right before that, and the whole operation of the PAS experts was geared toward advocating for parental alienation rather than advocating for keeping the shared delusional disorder diagnosis. What they did with it is they took it out as a separate diagnosis and put in shared as a qualifier over in delusional disorder. So right now it's a delusional disorder with a qualifier of shared. And that would be for the child. For the allied parent, it would just be a straight delusional disorder. The type is a persecutory type. So that's where the diagnostic systems stand on this right now. Interestingly, so I'll wrap up here because I'm kind of tired and I want to kind of rest and get on with stuff a little bit. But interestingly, so we have 25,000 children a year, 50,000 if you consider two per year, who are abused and in the family courts. And so there's only two possibilities for a child rejecting a parent, a child seeking to flee from a parent. There's only two things that cause that. One is child abuse by the targeted parent that's causing the child to want to flee that parent, get and reject that parent. That's path A. The other is path B, and that's if it's a false. It's not caused by the targeted parent. It's a false or a factitious attachment pathology imposed on the child, FDIA 300.19, and the parent's doing that by creating this shared persecutory delusion. a fixed and false belief that the child is being malevolently treated in some way. So we got the shared delusional disorder and the factitious disorder imposed on another, both of which are child abuse. So just based on the child's symptoms, I know we got child abuse by one parent or the other, which means every single case with that symptom should be getting a diagnosis of child abuse because that's the only thing that causes that symptom. So how many cases do we have like that? 25,000 a year. So we should be getting roughly 25,000 child abuse diagnoses out of the family court per year. How many are we getting? None. And that's where Claude just goes, whoa. When we're expecting 25,000 a year, 750,000 from 2013 to 2025, we would anticipate 750,000 child abuse diagnoses in the United States, and we're getting basically none. That's not like just underreporting. That's not because a coincidence. There's only one thing: we're misdiagnosing child abuse, and yes, we are. Now the problem is for the establishment. The moment they recognize that now, the moment they go, oh my gosh, this is a shared delusion. Oh my gosh, this is a false. Oh, this is child psychological abuse. We need to diagnose it. Then that means they haven't diagnosed it for the past 40 years. So they're kind of stuck. Do they start diagnosing the child abuse now and admit that they haven't diagnosed it for 40 years? Or that they continue to ignore it and allow another 25,000 children every year to be abused? 50,000 if you have 2 children, and if you consider it globally, it's 100,000 children a year. A year. And then you can just divide by 365 on any of those numbers and come out to like 250 children a day or something. Every single day, 250 children are entering the system who are being abused. So we should be getting 250 diagnoses of child abuse a day. And that speaks to the forensic custody evaluations. Ooh, my goodness. Because they're doing the evaluation. They take 6 to 9 months, which is a long time for when it's child abuse is being considered. So they just take a leisurely 6 to 9 months, and they're the ones that should be coming back with a child abuse diagnosis. Okay, they should be coming, and they're not. My goodness, this is just, when this opens up, it's going to be a scandal. Be like, oh my goodness gracious, far more than the sex abuse scandal in the Catholic Church that involves, unfortunately, people. But that's individuals, and it's nowhere near 750,000 in the past decade, or 25,000, abuse cases per day or per year, 25,000 per year. That was nothing like this. So this is going to be quite the scandal. And the reason that happened, just so I can clue you in, the reason it happened is because the forensic custody evaluators were allowed to perform an experiment on human subjects without institutional review board, IRB review, which is required for all experiments on human subjects. But they didn't conduct their experiment within the academic or healthcare settings where there's IRB reviews, and it's important, standard 8.01 of the AP Ethics Code. You get an IRB review, risk-benefit analysis, protection for the vulnerable populations, things like that. Didn't get it. The reason is they scooted over to the legal system to get authorization for their experiment, and the legal system has no oversight mechanisms. So they did a little shell game on what they're doing and said, oh, we're not in the treatment, we're not in academia, we're in the legal system, so now we can experiment on these children and parents. Well, guess what? Their experiment failed miserably. It's awful. New York Blue Ribbon Commission on Forensic Custody Evaluations, the only review ever conducted on them, found them to be dangerous, harmful to children, quote unquote, lacking scientific and professional or scientific and legal value, and that they produced defective reports with potentially disastrous consequences for parents and children. And they're not talking about the pathology. They're talking about the activity of the psychologist. The behavior of the psychologist is dangerous. The behavior of the psychologist is harmful to children and is producing potentially disastrous consequences. The psychologists, what they're doing, that should never happen. Psychologists are supposed to fix things, not be dangerous and harmful. So who's responsible for overseeing that these psychologists aren't doing dangerous and harmful things to the people? Licensing boards. Okay. You enforce 2.04, you enforce 8.01, you enforce 2.04. And yeah, so boundaries of competence, applied knowledge, and IRB review protect the people. Easy peasy. You get rid of the pseudoscience stuff and you get them to apply the DSM-5 and attachment and other things. But they didn't. Why not? It's called institutional regulatory capture. That's Stigler. And the situation here is called uh, institutional betrayal trauma. That's for all the now adult children and parents. Institutional betrayal trauma. That's Freud, Freyd. And the treatment for institutional betrayal trauma is called institutional courage. Okay, so they have to sort of step up like the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church has to acknowledge that this stuff happened and deal with the consequences. That's the treatment for the institutional betrayal trauma and institutional capture. Anyway, I'm going to head back out and get some rest here, maybe get something to eat, and then I'll start back in on preparing, and we'll see what happens next week. So with that, I'm going to run out of here. Good luck, everybody. Take care, and we will talk with you later.